Welcome to Taking Control of Your Menopause, and thank you for joining me. It's a big topic, of course, you know this because no doubt you're either experiencing it or you're about to experience it, or maybe you have and you kind of just want to see if there's any damage control that you can do. In terms of my background, I am just coming into menopause now. I'm 52. And I am fundamentally an exercise, nutrition and lifestyle coach. So I deal with every aspect of health as it relates to, in the context of menopause. I'm a health author, so I've had two books published. And a health presenter too, mostly for corporates and schools, sometimes for charity events. Just enjoy public speaking. I'm a mom too of a teenager. She's turning 15 shortly. And I put there pole dancer because it's not something the average 52-year-old does, but I thought it might be quite nice to note. And as I've said, it's not polezotic, it's pole sport. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, as I said, a fair amount of ground. We want to look at menopause itself and the impact of the hormonal decline that occurs when we go into menopause. And it's quite significant because we have so many receptor sites for hormones all over the body that in fact it affects us profoundly. We're going to be looking at carbohydrates and their impact on blood sugar because this is the one food group that we really need to watch for, and it's the one that can potentially be our downfall, but we can also use our knowledge in this area to our advantage as well. And then looking at this concept of, if you can manage blood sugar, you can manage your weight. Actually, you can manage your health too. But I think the menopause weight is just this. It tends to be an overriding issue for a lot of my clients. And of course, it's why we're doing today's session. So it's why you're here. You have an interest in that particular area. So we're going to be looking at that as well. Menopause and hormones. So what can we expect? Most of us understand the various phases of menopause, but I want to talk through those very briefly. The symptoms that we're likely to experience, why the changes happen when they do in terms of the hormonal impact, and then the big one is the fat storage and how we're going to reduce that, because that's, of course, that is key. So there are 3 phases, actually there are 4 phases. In fact, there's pre-menopause, but I don't really want to talk through that now because it's not really perceived to be it's not necessarily a big influencing factor. The perimenopause is really where everyone starts to kind of appreciate the symptoms and possible side effects of menopause. So perimenopause, menopause and postmenopause. And perimenopause can actually last a long time. 4 to 14 years is quite a period. So irregular menstrual cycles, you've got, you could actually experience a lot of the other symptoms associated with menopause, although most perimenopausal women don't seem to. Average age for menopause is around about 51, 52, so I'm kind of heading into that right now. And you are said to be through menopause when you haven't had a menstrual cycle for a full 12 months. So when that's fully done, you are then moving into postmenopause. And yes, it is a natural thing, of course. And, for many of us, it can be managed relatively comfortably. For some women, it is an extreme period to go through. And sometimes a little bit of help is very useful. So it is a very personal experience, but it can be actually quite a traumatic one too. Menopause symptoms can include, there are a lot. So we know about the weight gain, hot flushes, skin changes, thinning hair, bone loss, vaginal dryness, low libido, irritation and mood swings. It's good to blame that one on menopause. And insomnia, an awful one, that last. Actually, none of them are great. So we really want to try and manage as best we can with those. Hormonal decline. So I really put this slide in because I want to show you how profound the hormonal changes are for us. Estrogen, as I've said, we have estrogen receptor sites all over the body and in the brain. And it's just, It's crazy, and it's no wonder that we feel like we're going mad as estrogen levels come down and they're not hitting those receptor sites anymore. It's like, what? So it's almost that you can't recognize yourself sometimes. And a lot of the feedback I get from clients is it's like they lose their confidence, so they become really anxious, quite easy to stress, and then they just lose the confidence they've always known they had. So estrogen enhances your mood and memory, and so when that's gone, of course, both those things are going to be problematic. So you may well experience memory loss and some mood problems, and that's where the anxiety and the stress and potentially depression or sadness come in. Progesterone increases potency of the calming neurotransmitter GABA. So of course we have the lack of the mood, good mood stuff, and we have we have less of the calming stuff, and so put that together and we've got a lot of potential for anxiety and depression. When estrogen drops, signaling through receptors is reduced, and that exposes the brain to Alzheimer's. And this is one of the reasons I really like a ketogenic diet for my menopause clients, is because that, and also the intermittent fasting that goes with it, is because that actually offers incredible brain protection qualities. So although we're not getting it from estrogen anymore, we can actually shift and find other ways to protect the brain. So I think that's very important. And as estrogen and progesterone drop, of course, I've discussed mood swings, anxiety, and depression are rife. So that gives you a sense of, and I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, there are many, many ways that we are profoundly affected through this hormonal decline. So looking at carbohydrates, yes, peas are carbohydrates. In fact, peas are quite starchy carbohydrates. So what are they? What happens to carbs in the body? Because I think that's an important one to understand. What is insulin resistance? We'll cover what carbohydrates are in the diet, and then we'll look at some simple sugars too. So we've got fruits, we've got vegetables, grains, and simple sugars. Those are our fundamental carbohydrate groups. And in terms of what happens, because remember I said to you that carbs really are the one thing that you want to look at most closely, because it has the capacity to lead to the highest weight gain. And when you look at what happens to carbohydrates in the body, when they are digested and absorbed and assimilated, they break down into simple sugars. Now, if the food stuff is a relatively low sugar response food, let's say, a bar of chocolate next to, let's call it some sort of fibrous vegetable. So let's say broccoli. You've got quite a different setup. So the bar of chocolate is going to break down very quickly into simple sugars. It's going to get absorbed into the bloodstream as sugar or blood sugar. It's going to raise that blood sugar, okay? The pancreas will then secrete insulin that's going to come and collect that sugar, all right? So it's going to collect those little particles of sugar, and it's going to get sent to the cells' bodies. The body's cells. So it's going to the cells and it's knocking on the doors, but it wants to go into the cells that are going to use it first. So the muscle cells, the liver cells, it wants to get utilized as fuel. But whatever the cells can use, if they're empty enough, they can take that glucose from insulin. If they're not empty, if they're still full from the last time you ate or the last time you drank or, whatever, you haven't been particularly active and they're still full, then I'm afraid the excess is going to get stored as fat. So it just gets converted and it gets stored as fat for later. So you have to watch this, how quickly, the foods that you eat, how quickly do they release blood sugar? Or how quickly do they turn into sugar in the blood? And can you utilize them in that moment? Okay, so there's a lot behind that. We're actually not really going to discuss a huge amount of that, although I'm going to give you those 6 tips that are going to help you control this very well. Insulin resistance. You've heard the term, I'm quite sure. Eating high carb leads to, of course, this high blood sugar. When those levels are high, insulin is released, as I said, by the pancreas to help the muscle and liver cells to use that excess fuel. Okay, so the pancreas is trying to create homeostasis. It doesn't want a blood sugar level too high because that can cause you major, major problems. So it's going to take these glucose particles to the muscle and liver cells because it wants them to use that glucose as fuel. and whatever it can't be used as fuel is going to get stored as fat, as I've mentioned. But over time, these cells become very insensitive to insulin. So if there's a knock on the door, the cells aren't really going to hear it. If this happens consistently over and over again, it's just they're not going to hear that knock. And so you're going to need more insulin in order for the knock to be heard, in order for the cells to pick up and utilize that glucose. Okay, so the chances are that the more you do this, and the more you produce insulin, and the more your cells become insensitive to insulin, the more body fat you're going to store. It's as simple as that. So you need to get really, really smart about using excess glucose in the body, especially as we go into menopause, because hey, guess what? Low estrogen equals insulin resistance. So when our estrogen levels come down, we are much more resistant to insulin. It's almost like, as estrogen comes down, it's almost like we're pre-diabetic automatically. In other words, we can't really hear the knock that insulin has on the door. So that leads to much higher blood sugar levels and much greater chances of weight gain. Also, there are health implications like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We know that that becomes more of an issue. There's much more risk for that as we hit menopause as well. So yeah, this low estrogen leading to insulin resistance is actually the key. If I look at the work that I do with clients, this is the crux of it, and that's why I put this presentation together today, because it's the really, really important component. It's the one that we really have to understand. If we can understand that, we really can manage the weight gain. So I just want to show you a very brief picture of this insulin resistance, you know, where you eat the food that you eat, and unfortunately a lot of the time it's high in carb, and so we make insulin to respond to the high blood sugar. That because it's happening over and over again, the cells become resistant to it, and so it kind of hits a blank wall when it goes to the cells. So much more is stored as fat, and then because it's stored as fat and it's not given to the cells to use as energy, you're hungry again quickly because you can't access that stored body fat. So we need to change. This is what I do with clients, of course, is that we get them. We do the reverse. So we make sure that they're utilizing everything that comes in, and none of it is getting stored. Well, I mean, there'll always be a little bit being stored, but that's, you know, for rainy day stuff. So even the leanest person has got some body fat stored. So you can see it's a messy picture. It's not what we want, and it's not going to help us keep lean. So fruits, just to let you know, yes, they're high in nutrients, but they do contain fructose, which is sugar. So you want to eat them in small amounts. Eat them alone, okay, or don't eat them, because eating them on top of other food is a problem in terms of gut issues. You might want to look at low fructose fruits. So I've given you a list here, and this recording will be available afterwards. So don't worry if you miss that list right now. You can always take it down at a later stage. Vegetables, we want to stick mostly to the above ground vegetables, not the below ground vegetables, because below ground vegetables are much higher in starch and therefore release their sugars more quickly into the bloodstream, which means more chance. And I'm not saying don't eat below ground vegetables. That's not what I'm saying. Vegetables in general are not really going to do too much. Although obviously when we get into looking at the keto diet for menopause, you know, if you put dice a sweet potato and throw it in a cup, that's probably just more than a full day's worth of carbs. So even vegetables can be somewhat kind of high in carbs. But above ground vegetables you're fine with. You can go wild with those. In terms of grains, you definitely want to be choosing whole grains. Processed versions tend to be much higher sugar release foods. Breakfast cereals are a nightmare from a point of view of absorbing blood sugar very quickly. In particular, your extruded grains, that's just your more processed grains. Something like oats would be a better option, especially if it's rolled oats and not oatmeal. And ideally, my suggestion is that you just reduce the proportion of grains in the diet. I'm not saying take them out altogether. And if you've done any of my workshops on gut health, you'll know that I do promote some use of the grains in the diet. Simple sugars are really just, the only ones I recommend are natural alternatives to sugar. So your stevias, your erythritol, xylitol, monk fruit. Generally, these don't create a spiking experience. So you can have the sweetness without the blood sugar problems. I wouldn't touch artificial sweeteners. They are chemicals and they have to be embedded into some kind of food that can be added, or something that can be added as a powder or whatever it is put into is a bulking agent, and that tends to be maltodextrose or dextrose, which is sugar. Raw honey is great. It's a beautiful natural foodstuff, but also a concentrated sugar. So actually, I think an example, if I give you one, is half a teaspoon of honey is about the same carbs as a banana or a sweet potato, I think, if I remember correctly. So it's quite high. Okay, so we want to move into, this is the section where we are going to focus on, because this is about managing blood sugar, and it's about these 6 very fundamental steps that we want to take that will help us manage this crashing, or the peaking highs and the crashing lows. All right, so what are we going to cover? We're going to look at glycaemic variability. It's a technical term, but it just is, well, I'll explain shortly. But glycaemic variability is important in the context of managing weight. And we want to look at inflammation together with blood sugar management, because those two are very, very connected. It's really important to be able to manage inflammation. We're going to look at the causes of inflammation, and then, of course, those 6 easy things you can do to avoid storing fat. What is glycemic variability? It's really, if you were looking at a graph, it's just that, it's that top point hit and it's the bottom point hit. It's that upward and downward swing in the amount of blood glucose over any given period. We know that if average blood glucose is chronically high, we've got those risks. We've got heart disease, we've got diabetes risk, we've definitely got weight gain. And also this, so actually what we want to do is we want to compress that upward and downward trend. So we want to concentrate on a very, very small window of glycemic variability. Because even just the extreme change in those two can lead to the same problems that you'll have from having an extreme high and an extreme low over a longer period. So whether it's a very quick up and down, or whether it's over a prolonged, it doesn't really matter. You're going to experience the same problems. So what we want to do is we want to flatten the top and pick up the bottom, so that we really don't get major spikes and we really don't get downward troughs. And we're just going to squeeze that into a much flatter line. So that's what we want to focus on. And that's the key, as I said, because that's about managing blood sugar. Inflammation and blood sugar. So how's this? You've got, the body actually has a capacity to kill off fat cells, because we know actually when we start to pick up body fat, we can either increase the size of our fat cells or we can increase the number of them. So think about it. If you've been consistently increasing the number of fat cells over time, let's say you've had years and years of storing body fat, and you haven't managed to get rid of it. What you really want to, what you'll know is that you've probably got a lot more fat cells you had before you started picking up the weight. So what we want to do is we actually want to kill off those fat cells. We want to change those cells maybe into other types of cells, or we literally want to eliminate them altogether. Okay, we do have that capacity. But if we are experiencing inflammation, we can't manage that. So we have to manage inflammation in the body in order to kill off the fat cells or change them into another type of cell. So there is this interplay between glycemic variability and inflammation. In other words, if there's a huge trend in upward and downward spikes, there's more likely to be inflammation in the body, and possibly vice versa, in fact vice versa as well. Okay, the more inflammation there is, the more likely you are to be unable to manage insulin terribly well. There we go. In fact, that goes to the last point. Chronic inflammation causes excess insulin. And the minute you've got excess insulin, what happens? Your cells become deaf to the signal. They don't hear the knock. Anytime you eat glucose, most of it is going to get stored. Okay, let me not say most. It depends on your lifestyle. But a lot of it may get stored as fat, as body fat. And then it's a bit of an issue, obviously, getting rid of it, because that body fat likes to stay where it is sometimes. It takes a little bit of encouraging, shall we say, to get it out. Actually, it honestly doesn't take too long. It just requires some very specific tools to be in place. And I've dealt with some of those in past masterclasses, and specifically it relates to the keto diet and to the concept of intermittent fasting, which is just temporary hunger. So skipping breakfast, for example, with some caveats. So what are the causes of inflammation? Because these are the things we obviously need to look out for. Smoking is an obvious one. Chronic stress, of course, and that is something, unfortunately, that we experience a great deal of in our current lifestyles. It just is the way it is. We have to really try and get a handle on that. And in fact, these days, I rarely talk about stress management with my clients. Typically, we talk about building stress resilience. So in fact, what we want to do is we want to build resilience to stress at a cellular level. And again, actually, intermittent fasting and the keto diet can be very, very helpful with that, because it is very gentle on the mitochondria, which are your little energy factory cells, or energy factory units inside the cell. So stress is a very big one. Acute and untreated infection or injury, consistently insufficient sleep, and that, of course, we know is a problem in menopause, is this concept of insomnia and or struggling to get to sleep, or broken sleep. Poor diet, in particular regular intake of rancid veg oils. I put rancid before it because typically any vegetable oil that is heat extracted is immediately rancid. So with any oil, when you expose it to oxygen and light, if it comes from a very unstable source, like vegetables, it can be damaged very, very quickly. And the minute you heat an oil to extract it, you are damaging it. It's much better to have a pressed oil than it is to have a heat extracted oil. And then excessive alcohol intake. And if I think about most of our clients, alcohol becomes the, I'm not saying it's a crutch, it's just that it's like one of those pleasures in life that we really, sometimes we'd quite like to hang on to. So that can be a little bit of an issue in terms of, look, excess is excess. We're not talking about a small glass of wine, dare I say, 3 or 4 times a week, not a night. I have some clients who do that, yes, most nights. All right, so here are our simple things that we can do to avoid storing fat. Trick 1. Very, very simple concept is to engage in strength training. So what we want, remember, what exercise is very good at is it makes us more insulin sensitive. Now, for me in perimenopause at the moment, because I still get my period, although it's a little bit all over the place, when a menstrual cycle starts, estrogen is very low, and you can start to gauge at various parts through that cycle, whether you're in the follicular or the luteal phase or whatever it is. There's certain times where you're going to be much more insulin sensitive. In other words, you can take more carbs and you can enjoy them more, knowing that you're not really going to pick up weight from those. Now, this is what strength training does very, very well, is that it actually enhances your body's ability to push more sugar into the cells to use as fuel. Okay, so it means that it's more, well, it makes you more insulin sensitive. And you know that if your estrogen is low and you're in menopause, you're going to be insulin insensitive. So one of the best things you can do is resistance training. So it can be light. I've got a lot of menopause clients who do my online Pilates mat strength class. Now that's a half-hour class 3 times a week, and it's pretty much all body weight stuff. And that will be incredibly, incredibly effective at getting that glucose into the cells to be utilized as fuel, and then you get an effect out of that. And it doesn't require a hell of a lot for that. Apart from anything else, obviously strength training is a great way to promote a great shape. And so you want a little bit of tone and size in the muscle to generate or to improve a muscle's shape. You want a bit of firmness, and that will take care of often what happens for us in menopause is because collagen is reduced significantly, quality of collagen and the quantity of collagen, we start getting a more saggy skin. I mean, I've noticed this myself. So the only way that we can counter that really is to grow a little bit of muscle size to push against the skin, and that just makes it look much younger. So it has multiple benefits, in my opinion, when it comes to what we're trying to do in menopause in terms of countering the effects. So that's number one, engage in strength training. Number two, do cardio in the morning in a fasted state. So before you have breakfast, if you're a person who eats breakfast, then before you have breakfast, do cardio. If you are intermittent fasting like me, you just do cardio in the morning in a fasted state. This will help you control blood sugar levels very, very nicely. So you want to do everything you can to ensure, again, that we're pushing glucose into the cell, that we are switching the cells on to hear the knock that insulin will give it when it comes to the door and it wants to offer those cells the fuel. So in cardio, it doesn't need to be anything spectacularly intensive. It can just be a pacey walk. You could grab the dogs and go around a couple of blocks. 20, 30 minutes. A bike ride to work would be ideal if you're not eating before you get to work. Maybe a light jog if you really enjoy jogging. Just something that is, I would say, around about 20 to 30 minutes and moderate, nothing intensive. So that's trick number two. Both are related to exercise, of course. Number three, stroll after eating. So this is interesting because if I remember correctly, I think you reduce your body's chances of storing fat after eating are reduced by around 10 to 11% if you are active after you eat. I don't mean at a moderate or high intensity. I just mean that there's movement after you've eaten. I mean, that's an enormous amount that you save yourself, 10%, 11%. So you reduce your chances of storing fat after eating if you are active or if you've got some sort of movement. And again, it could just be a stroll. It could be housework. I mean, because I spend quite a lot of time on my laptop these days, I make sure, and it'll come into the other point that we'll talk about now, is the standing more often. But I make sure that every half an hour I get up and I either vacuum upstairs or I'll wash the dishes, or if I've eaten, I'll get up and I'll do some light housework, because then I'm on my feet for the next 20 minutes or so. And that just takes care of that. And these are all very small little things, but put them together and they have a very significant effect. So, and they don't hurt you either, do they? Being a little active after eating, going for a stroll around the block is not going to harm anyone, and certainly your dog will love you more for it. So stand more often. This is a big one. Actually, this is a big problem, I think, for many people. And my solution, what I offer up as a solution, because of course, standing desk, you can get a standing desk, you can, they can be quite pricey, they can be a bit of a faffy thing to implement, but there's a very simple solution. Either you find if you're working off a laptop, you can find a counter that's the right height for you. When we talk about the right height, it must be that your elbows can be at 90 degrees on the keyboard. So that you shouldn't have hands higher than the elbows or lower. That's an ideal height for you. So if you can tap away on your keyboards with the elbows at 90 degrees, you're in the perfect position. If you don't have such a counter, then why not grab a box from, Woolworths, Waitrose, cut it to the right depth. So when you're standing at your desk, cut it, maybe you need a fairly deep box, put your laptop or your remote keyboard or mouse, so make sure it's a big enough box, cut it to the right height and use that. And the minute you start getting tired again, you can just throw the box off into the corner, sit down and work. And I would suggest that you switch every 30 minutes. It's too easy to get stuck into being seated for a very long time. And what we do know is that the average person who sits for 6 hours or more as an adult, okay, so over the course of a normal adult life in terms of working, if you sit for 6 hours or more uninterrupted, you are looking at a possible life reduction, a longevity reduction of 5 years. So that's a lot. That's a lot of life to lose over just not standing. And that's simply to do with the fact that when you stand, you're creating a gravity situation. You're forcing your heart to work harder to get that blood around the body. And so you keep it switched on and you keep it active. The minute you sit down, you've lost that. But more importantly, because this is the workshop we're doing today, from a fat burning point of view, when you stand, you activate an enzyme on the cells that utilizes fat very, very nicely. The minute you sit down, you switch it off. Not the minute, but in general, the seated position switches that enzyme off. So then you lose your possibilities of reducing body fat as well, or you increase the possibility of storing more fat. That's trick 4. Now, trick number 5. Eat foods that stabilize blood sugar. So this is quite a nice one because it's just about adding certain foodstuffs to the food that you already eat. Obviously, watch the carbs. We want to keep the carbs relatively low. But if you're having something like a below ground vegetable, or maybe you're having a fruit that isn't a particularly low fructose fruit, maybe it's a banana. Personally, I would just throw a whole lot of cinnamon over that. But you can add things like berberine or bitter melon extract or rock lotus. And those will actually just dampen the effect of sugar on the blood glucose. Sorry, that will dampen the effects of blood glucose in the body. So that's quite a nice, easy one to do because, as I say, it's just an addition to the diet. It's not actually taking anything away or asking you to do anything too wild in your diet. Okay, and that is trick number 5. So we've got some very basic ones. And again, I've said that I'm recording this, so you can always come back and have a look at these and check and remind yourself of these shortcuts, these little tricks. And trick number 6 is to consume more fiber. So look, that just means more salads. It means more vegetables, preferably above ground vegetables, more than below ground vegetables. And this is because insoluble fiber is broken down into units that can reduce fat storage. So I'm simplifying this terribly, but we don't really need to go into the detail of it. We want to improve insulin sensitivity and improve glucose tolerance, that's sugar tolerance. And insoluble fiber can help you do all 3 of those. So it's a good idea to bring some fiber in. It also slows down, more fibrous foods will slow down the rate of absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. And sometimes I have clients saying to me, if I want to have something really, okay, let me give you an example. I love carrot cake. But if I eat carrot cake, I generally pour a tub of cream over it. And the reason for that is because the cream is so high in fat, it will create a more flat lining. So it will squash my glycaemic variability because because the fat will slow down the rate of absorption of those sugars. And so I find that if I have something with a lot of fat and sugar, look, it's not great to do it often, but doing it every now and then is perfectly fine. And what it means is I won't be hungry for hours and hours and hours and hours after that because I put so much fat in. But I also won't get the usual kind of blood sugar spike and then that disastrous kind of, I just want to put my head down and fall asleep. So I don't get that from it because I add so much fat. So I am more inclined, if I do something high sugar, to certainly add whether it's the berberine or the cinnamon or whatever it is, but also add some fat. But that's because I don't do it terribly often, but it does mean that I don't overeat in the context, because you probably all know that experience where you have something that's very high carb and you're hungry quite soon after you've had it. So you get the spike where you feel wild, and then you get the crash where you just want to sleep, and then you're hungry quite soon after it. If you add more fat to that, like I do, you certainly won't be hungry anytime soon. Okay, so let's just recap on those. We've got engage in strength training. We've got do cardio in the morning in a fasted state. So if you're going to eat breakfast, do it before breakfast. Number 3, take a stroll after eating. So any meal, just take a stroll around the block. Number 4, stand more often. Maybe put an alarm on your phone to go off every half an hour or something so that it reminds you to switch between the standing and the sitting. Number 5, eat foods that stabilize or add foods that stabilize blood sugar, because that's a fairly easy thing to do. Number 6, consume more fiber. So more above ground vegetables, more salad stuff, and maybe your low fructose fruits. I want to end with this a quote by Ben Greenfield. If glycemic variability gets out of control and blood sugar gets too high, your body has essentially two choices. It's either going to shovel the sugar into the muscles or liver, okay, or it's going to store them in body fat. And we know that if we engage in strength training, it's more likely to push it into the cardio in the morning, it's more likely to push it into the cells of the muscle and the liver. Or otherwise, if you don't do any of those tricks that we've talked about, you're going to store it as body fat. So if energy expenditure through the day isn't high enough to convert that excess blood sugar or the actual blood sugar into potential energy, you will gain fat tissue. And you've learned that in a very, very simple way today. So yeah, that really concludes the subject. I'm going to cover one or two other things with you, but that is in essence the reasoning behind why you would want to manage this carbohydrate response in the body. So as I said, carbs become a really important one to watch out for as we go into menopause. If you'd like to learn more, because of course this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the things that you can do that will massively impact on not only your health and your mindset, your state of mental health, but also on your weight. So you could join me one-on-one. I do a lot of online work with clients. And then there is the option of doing my online 3-month menopause health course. So that's a mixture of seeing me online one-on-one. It's access to my Pilates mat strength classes, those 30-minute workouts 3 times a week, which are really effective for the glucose enhancement, but also from a body shape change point of view. I'm extremely pedantic about technique. I base all my workouts on the scientific principles of resistance training so that I am as effective with every single minute you're with me as possible, so you get an enhanced result in a faster time. So that 3-month menopause health course will include the classes, some one-on-one work with me, and then a whole lot. It's around about 15 hours worth of one-on-one and on-demand workshops. So those on-demand lectures you can watch anytime. You can watch them multiple times. And then obviously you can just look at subscribing to my on-demand Pilates mat strength classes. And this is really just to give you a taste of what we would cover in the menopause health program, my online program. So we're going to look at obviously taking control of your menopause, getting you to reclaim your body, reclaim the mindset you knew, your old self, the self that you've known all your life. You want to reduce hot flashes, improve your sleep, obviously get rid of that midriff fat, and maybe get leaner all over, certainly getting healthier, strengthening the body, increasing your energy levels, because I think that's a very important thing too. We've got a lot of life ahead of us. We need to make sure that we can manage that energetically. We want to improve mental clarity. That one is a big one. Motivation also, of course, well-being. And then it's really just to tell you that there's a fabulous questionnaire that I begin with. It's such a lovely document because it gives so much insight into your current state of health. And it just allows you to see, and it allows both of us to sit with this incredible graph that is questionnaire based. So it's very intensive in the sense that it's going to ask you, gosh, it takes maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes to complete. But when we have that visual in front of us, it's literally a picture of your health. So we look at liver, gut, thyroid, female hormone scores, cardiovascular scores, mood, you name it, immunity. Every single system in your body is checked. And then we can start to see where is there inflammation. So we know that we need to deal with that inflammation. We know we need to deal with the areas that are highly stressed. And so we're able to actually see that in picture format. And that allows us to then start thinking about which avenues we need to go down so that we can start to be more efficient with the kinds of changes we start talking about when we impact on your lifestyle. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'll stay on the line for another 5 minutes if anyone wants to ask me any questions. But for the rest of you, if you would like to go, please feel free to leave. And thank you once again.